There comes a point in your life when you realize the only thing that's holding you back is you. That the thing that's limiting you the most is the stories that are running in your own mind. Now, I wanted to make this video very personal, and I wanted to go super deep on some very key things, key insights that will hopefully change your life in a very meaningful way. Now, you might not be ready for this. You might still be living in a story that blames other people, that blames your life circumstances, or that blames society. And that's okay. There'll be a point, hopefully, where life gets you to wake up, where you realize, holy shit, all the things I was blaming isn't the real reason. And the real thing that's holding me back is me. Or more importantly, what's going on in my mind is what's holding me back. Now, it took me a long time to get here, to realize that this was true for me. For most of my life, I was trapped in stories. I was playing the victim mode. And I had some very strong narratives running below the surface that I wasn't aware of. The most powerful and the most limiting was that I didn't feel enough. I didn't feel that my worth as a person was enough. I felt like I always had to prove something. I had to prove my worth through achievements. I had to prove my worth through doing something to validate that I deserve to be seen, appreciated. And in my family, which were all runners, everyone competed at running. And being a good runner meant good worth. You got seen. I could achieve something. So for a long time, for over a decade, I trained 4 to 6 times a week. As a runner, on some levels, I liked running. I enjoyed it. But below the surface, on a deeper level, I was battling for my worth, battling to feel enough, to feel seen. I always wanted to run faster, to get that next result, that next race, that next outcome, so that I could get to a point where I felt good enough. I felt like I belonged or I was enough. Alongside that narrative, I had a second story narrative. And the second narrative that was very strong for me was scarcity. I grew up in a family where we didn't have many resources, and the narrative I had in my mind was people like me, people like my family, we don't have much, and we have to be very careful with resources, but almost on some level that I was never going to have much. I felt like, just based on what I'd observed growing up, that I was just going to settle for less. That was just who I was, and there was nothing to change that. So these were strong drivers throughout my childhood and into my early adolescence. And I remember from 18 to 22, I kind of opted out these games. I went to university, went to a new city, around new people, and I could kind of reinvent myself. So I went for the sociable, fun person, and I didn't have to try too hard in terms of goals. I could just try to fit in. So all of my identity got linked to fitting in, being one of the crew, being someone who was liked. And I put my external goals on hold. But I was still running, I was still training, I just wasn't challenging myself. I almost had an excuse not to take risks because I was not trying so hard. A story that comes to mind, which kind of embarrassing and kind of a low point, I guess, for me in running, was I had the National University Championships. And I trained for months, years, for races like this. And that week, I went partying, clubbing till 3, 4 in the morning, 3 times, including the night before the race. And I remember I justified this at the time, that my heats were on the Saturday afternoon, and I went out on the Friday. I justified that if I can get through the heat, I have a full day to recover, and I will be fine for the main event, which is on Sunday. This was my justification at the time. Lo and behold, surprise, surprise, I ran awful in the heat. I got knocked out in a heat that I should definitely got through, and I didn't make the final. So I went home. There was no event to cover. And this was just a kind of shows how much I was self-sabotaging myself, how much I was saying to myself, I could be enough, I could be good enough, but I'm not trying hard enough. I'm not putting the work in. And that's enough to kind of justify the kind of bad results I'm getting. Then fast forward to my poker career. And a few years in, I was living in Bali with 2 of my closest friends. And I remember I was pushing for Supernova Elite volume. So I'd gone from $15 heads up sit and goes to $300 heads up sit and goes. And it was the first year where I was like, right, this year I'm going to blast volume and get Supernova Elite rake back. And I remember just not checking in much in terms of anything financial for that whole time. in my head, I was printing money for the first time. I was going to have money at the end of this, and I was going to be in a good position. And I didn't look at my expenditures, what I was spending, anything. I didn't think about money. I thought, right, I'm Supernova Elite Grinder. I'm going to have loads of money at the end of the year. So the year finished. It was on December 31st. I hit my Supernova Elite checkpoint. You get like a nice EV, sort of rake back cash out at the end of that. I can't remember what it was, 20K, something like that. And I remember going, right, next week I will do my audit and see how much my net worth is. And I was actually excited for the first time to look at numbers. So first week of January, I got my numbers together, checked my PokerStars cashier. After my rake back deals, I had 38,000. I was like, yes, 30,000. There must be more money because I've definitely done better than this year. So I checked my other wallets and I checked my accounts. And I was a bit surprised. There was not much else anywhere. So I had a few thousand here for my bank account for general expenses, a few thousand in wallets, again for living expenses, but I didn't really have much else to show for it. And I remember feeling a little bit disappointed. And then things were about to get a whole lot worse. At the start of this year, I'd agreed with my housemates to do an EV chop. So basically what we decided, we would look at our EV between the three of us, and if we ran good, we'd chop it between us, and if we ran bad, we'd split the kind of run bad between three of us. And then my friend showed me his graph. I was about break even, so was my other friends, but one of them was 85K under EV. So between us, we owed roughly 30K each. So he's like, hey, can you send me that 30K? So now my 38K cashier just gets blitzed, and I'm now down to 8,000. And I remember feeling so demoralized, so frustrated. I was like, I've literally put so many hours in this year, 10-hour days, maybe 300 days of the year, 3,000 hours into this, and I've got nothing to show for it. And I remember thinking, this is just how it is. I remember thinking, well, I was sad and I was upset and I was annoyed, but those old story narratives, like you don't deserve more, you're not enough, you're not good enough, you're always bad with money, they all started coming to the surface. And I remember for a few days, I played the victim card. I went along with it. I was like, I'm going to blame variance. I'm going to blame this deal that I did. I'm going to blame everyone but me. But then at some point, it shifted. And I remember thinking, what if I'm the problem? What if the problems I'm experiencing are because of the stories that I'm telling myself about money? And this is the first time I've actually confronted this. I'm probably 25, 26 at this point. And it's the first time I've started to think, wait a second, maybe something's going on in my mind that's causing these stories or these results. So this led me on a deep dive. And it was the first time I've actually went on a deep dive into myself. And I remember the first book I picked up was Unwaking the Giant Within by Tony Robbins. And this got me to look at the stories I was telling myself and the power of your stories in terms of how they impact your life. And I quickly realized that my past experiences had led me to tell a lot of stories. Stories about limiting finances, stories about not being enough, and a lot of kind of scarcity, fixed, rigid stories around lack and scarcity that was still playing true now. And I started to really go deeper into understanding the mind. And I found out a very big insight about the personal mind and how the personal mind is generally formed in our early formative years. Let's call it before 6. And it's based on our past experiences. And what the personal mind's trying to do is create a kind of worldview. And it's trying to, one, protect you, keep you safe, and also get you to fit in, to feel loved and acceptance. So it comes up with very strong stories to help you make sense of the world and to feel safe and protected. And for a 6-year-old, this is your survival toolkit. It's all you've got. You haven't really got your cognitive reasoning skills. You can't really make sense of the world in a true sense. So you rely on these kind of story narratives, and you end up living in them. Now, that's fine when you're 6 years old, but all of a sudden you become an adult. At some point, there's a transition period, and you don't realize these same stories are driving all your decisions. All your behaviors are driven by those same 4-year-old, 5-year-old kid who felt scared, who didn't belong, who felt like he wasn't enough, who felt like there wasn't much resources. Those become the narratives that you're still trying to overcome, or you're still trying to almost like you're trying to verify the story. You're almost trying to prove the story's right. It's a weird thing. When we've got these stories in our heads, we look for evidence to support them. So for me, I was looking for evidence of why I never had money. I was looking for evidence of why I wasn't enough. And I was finding it everywhere in my world. So This is very powerful once you realize this, because now you've got two options. You either do the work to clean this up, or you live stuck in this narrative. You stay trapped in this story that you're not enough, that you haven't got the resources. For me, it was the scarcity mindset, and you get trapped. And I almost picture this like you lift up a rug. When you're doing the inner work, it's like lifting up a rug and seeing all the dirt that's underneath, all the stuff that's acquired over a long period of time. And to be honest, most people, they pull the rug up and go, oh, loads of shit under there, let's put the rug back down, get on with my life. That's how most people approach it. However, if you want to really clean things up, if you want to do the deep work and actually get past this, you've got to do the cleanup. You've got to do the cleanup when you see the mess. You see this, the ugly parts of yourself, the belief systems, the parts that are kind of not where you want them to be. So how do you begin to clean things up? How do you start to do the work that actually allows you to break free from these story narratives? For me, the first thing, the most important step, was really bringing those beliefs, those stories that were running below the surface to the surface. Those things that were in my subconscious into my conscious awareness. I told you there, those kind of beliefs I had around not being enough and around money that were limiting me a lot, but I didn't know that for a long time. So the first thing you need to do is examine the stories you're telling yourself. For me, I did this in key areas. So the first one is, what are the stories I'm telling myself about achievements or my career? What stories am I telling myself about my health, my body? What stories am I telling myself about my relationships? And what stories am I telling myself about money and finances? And you can also look at what stories you're telling yourself about the future, what you think the future will hold, and what are the stories you are telling yourself about the past. All right, so it's good here to go very broad, big buckets, because you'll see recurring themes. All right, if you just cover 2 or 3 of those areas I've said there, you will almost certainly unpack a lot of stuff. All right, and for me, I like to journal on this, either write in journal or I'll do a digital journal, and I'll just write what are my beliefs in this area, and I'll just go for ages. I often write 1,000 words, a few thousand words, but the main thing is, can you start to uncover and bring to the surface some of these stories? All right, so that's step 1. Once you understand that, the next step is to break down some of those stories. All right, and you break down a story by questioning its validity. All right, is this story really true? All right, for myself, I have quite a logical mind. So I work very well by going, is this actually true? What's the logic behind this? And a lot of the time, you very quickly see this story is very flawed. It's got very little evidence. It's based on a lot of old childhood narratives, and you can really find a way to disarm it just by exploring it. All right, so look at it for yourself and see what the evidence against it is. So for example, for myself, when I start to look at evidence of not being enough, I start to look for times where I have been enough and where that story came from. It was all about fitting in, being accepted, and right now, did I really need that? Did I need anything to feel enough? What was stopping me feel enough in my current situation? And there wasn't anything. There was nothing in the way. And then when it came to scarcity, I realized I've went from having 0 money to 1,000 to 10,000 to multiple 10,000s at that point when I was 25, 26. So I realized, I went from 0 to making money. I can make more money in the future. So I started to look for evidence to support it. So first of all, break down the old story and then look for evidence to support the new story. And then after that, you start to create a new identity. All right, and this is the long work. This is the work I spend a lot of time on with my coaching students and myself on creating a new identity you're working towards. Who are you becoming day by day? Who are the actions? What are the actions that you're doing that are helping you to become a better version of yourself? And how is that aligning with the narrative? All right, because you have either a narrative that's working against you and you're almost trying to swim against the current and make progress despite a narrative of lack, insecurity, or you realize the mind's always living in some form of narrative. So you create a narrative of becoming, of a new identity, of a new version of you, and you step into that story like you're the hero in your journey, the hero of the story, and you start to embody that, and you live in that narrative. And now instead of what you lack, you start to think about what you're becoming. All right, I'll do a whole new video at some point on the power of identity, the power of stories, and the power of changing those. But hopefully that's given you a lot of food for thought, a lot of reflections to think about, and to really uncover your beliefs. So I'd love to know in the comments if you've done any work in here or if this has inspired you to think about this more. Let me know in the comments what your biggest takeaway was, and I look forward to reading those.